Okay, perfect. Well, I still see the numbers going up of people joining, but we'll go ahead and get started. And then as you guys get into the webinar, just jump in when you're here. Great. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Allison, and I'm the Coaching and Education Manager with Horse Council BC. Just like to do a land acknowledgement as well before we get started. The land where the HCBC office is located is on the Katsi, Kwantlen, Matsqui, and Sami-Amu First Nations. And we'd just like to also, as many of us are attending virtually, like to recognize all traditional territories we're meeting on today. And this webinar is going to be recorded and we will put it up on our YouTube channel at a later date. For questions, you can put those into the Q&A box and we will answer those at the end of the webinar. But yeah, other than that, I'm here with Dr. Bobsein today, who's here to talk to us about the update on the Equine Code of Practice. And yeah, I'll just hand that over to you, Dr. Bobsein.
Thank you for that, Sarah, and welcome everybody. Nice to see so many people out on an evening ready to talk about this really, really important project. I'm going to be going through just a brief rundown of the co-development process. And, there'll be lots of you that are people like me that we're not about process. We're about getting our hands dirty and getting to work with a horse and a pitchfork and a bridle and a saddle. But process is absolutely critical. And because without understanding of how the codes of practice are developed, I really don't think anyone's in a position to make meaningful contributions because it's a kind of an internationally unique system that brings all of the actors to the table. So that means bringing together people from the behaviorists, veterinarians, animal welfare advocates, the rodeo sector, the racing sector, performance horse sector, breeding, and trying to get all those horse people together at a table and agree on some hardline standards that apply all the way across Canada is a pretty big ask. And as a result of that, NFAC has a very stringent code process that we go through to ensure that the codes of practice are valid, that they are acceptable to the Canadian public and the Canadian audience and Canadian agricultural sector, and that they are scientifically sound. So we're just going to run through what sort of the whole code of practice development is, and then we're going to actually talk about the newest requirements, which are the things that everybody in Canada is responsible for if they are own keeping or are responsible for horses. So this is actually a code update. And what we are doing is we're working on the process of updating the last Equine Code of Practice, which was published in 2023. And this is under the umbrella of NFAC, the National Farm Animal Care Council. And it is a collaborative partnership of diverse stakeholders and welfare partner organizations. And we have over 50 active members. And we are the national lead for farm animal care in Canada for all species. And what does NFAC do? NFAC, it provides a process for the codes of practice for the care and handling of farm animals. That's all farm animals, even including farmed fish and mink and fox. So it's everything: dairy, beef, sheep, veal, the whole deal. We also provide a process for developing assessment programs, which are called the Animal Care Assessment Framework. So that's where you find out whether your codes are actually functioning as they should. And the big thing is to facilitate information sharing and communication. So it's a powerful education tool. So, and how do we do this? We have what's called a consensus-based model of decision making. And what that means is might does not equal right. It's not a simple vote. Consensus means everybody at the table has to agree. And trust me, go to a tack store and ask anybody's opinion on any horse subject, and you will have 3 people that vehemently disagree with each other. And we have 15 to 16 people that have to agree on everything. So that's a challenge. And how do we get it done? By cultivating relationships, by collaborating, building trust, and ensuring open communication. And what is NFAC's real goal? Our goal is to get real progress on farmed animal welfare in Canada while maintaining the viability of Canadian animal agriculture. In other words, we'd love everything to be perfect, and that's not economically and climatically frequently in Canada not possible. So, what are codes of practice? The codes of practice are guidelines for the care and handling of farm animals, and they represent our national understanding of farm animal care requirements and recommended practices. They're scientifically informed, they're practical, and reflect societal expectations for responsible farm animal care. And in the horse world, if you've been doing any watching or reading, the social license to operate has become a very important concept. At this moment, I'm going to have to step away for 1 minute. Just a moment, please. You're able to bring that in. Yeah. If you would please bring that in. Thank you so much. And you have more than one chair. Anywhere.
How about this chair? That works. It's too tight as I make it lengthwise. Yes. Is that gonna be okay? Yes. Thank you. Of course, be careful, but it's okay.
That's everything. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. My apologies. We have a family health thing going on, so I'm wearing a couple of hats today. So if you have been watching the media, reading the media at all, so the whole concept of social license to operate, which is the whole idea of what Canadian society is prepared to let us do with our horses, is in the forefront. And keep an eye on that, because that could be a game changer for our industry. Codes of practice, what do they serve as? They serve as extension tools, so super, super valuable as an educational tool. So if you're putting on an information thing for your horse club, if you're involved in 4-H, if you're involved in pony club, they can be a really useful educational resource. As I mentioned, they're also the foundation for animal care assessment programs, but also very important, they're reference material for regulators. So this is what in British Columbia, the BCSPCA uses as their minimum standards care manual when they have to go and see an abuse or a neglect situation. So Canada's codes of practice, their renewed code development process, we've done some updating on it, and it's a uniquely collaborative approach, as I mentioned, and it ensures credibility and transparency through scientific rigor, stakeholder collaboration, and a consistent approach. So it's very predictable for the participants. They know what's going to happen. NFAC has completed 15 codes since 2009. And the last code of practice for horses was released in 2013. So what's actually in a code? And you can see the table of contents there on the right-hand side as an example. Every code must have the following topics, which are housing and handling, feed and water, health management with things like record keeping, care of sick or injured animals, husbandry, stockmanship, so handling, care of young and cull animals, emergency management and preparedness, barn fires, floods, power outages, that kind of thing. Pre-transportation considerations, and now some transport considerations because we don't have a transportation code of practice that's currently in date, and also euthanasia. Codes have two important things at the end of every descriptive narrative, and those are the requirements and the recommended practices. Requirements are essentially the part of provincial law. In British Columbia, the codes of practice are referenced in provincial law. So whenever you see a requirement, that's basically what the BCSPCA will go to court on to enforce. Recommended practices, this is where you get to up your game. And keep your eye on the recommended practices because they tend to morph their way into being requirements in the next code updates. And typically code updates are supposed to happen every 8 to 10 years. Sometimes though, things like COVID happen, funding, one thing and another. So, codes frequently now seem to endure a little bit longer, probably closer to 12 years. So requirements are the regulatory requirement or the industry imposed expectations outlining acceptable and unacceptable practices. They represent the fundamental obligation for animal care. They're measures that, at a minimum, must be implemented by all persons responsible for animal care. So that's everybody in Canada that is responsible for a horse. They could be part of an assessment program and with consequences for failure to implement. So if you actually have an inspection program in your province, you could run into problems if you're not meeting those standards. And in British Columbia, they are enforceable under provincial legislation. And here's an example, British Columbia. So for pastures and yards, this is from 2013. We'll have to pick, if we have to pick one, we're going to pick mud. So in muddy conditions in 2013, horses must, at minimum, have access to a mud-free, well-drained area in the pasture or yard on which to stand and lie down. We've actually modified that requirement because there are people that are really struggling to meet that requirement, and we have to find a way to keep those horses safe from mud, but still be viable. So there are a lot of farms where all of the paddock areas are considered somewhat unacceptably muddy, but the horses are only out there for 6 hours a day and are going into pristine dry stalls. Well, that's probably okay. It's not ideal. But the reality is on the South Coast, you can spend as much money on bedding and mud removal as you can on feed, particularly on the South Coast. So recommended practices, they may complement requirements, they promote producer education, they encourage adoption of practices for continuous improvement in animal welfare outcomes, and they're generally expected to enhance animal welfare, but failure to implement does not imply that acceptable standards of animal care are not met. So in other words, you do not, where the recommended practices are not a hard line for animal owners, but it's where you should be heading if you're responsible and progressive. So here's an example of a recommended practice. So practice good pasture management, e.g. pasture rotation, weed control, and appropriate stocking density. That makes really good sense, and that's something for people to strive toward. And another recommended practice is maintain pastures free from equipment, debris, and poisonous plants. Also an ideal. Does tansy ragwort still end up in some really good horse people's fields? Yes, it does. Eventually, we'd like to see people move to the point where there's no poisonous weeds at all. That would be a goal. So the previous code of practice of 2013 is available in English and French, and it contains 127 requirements with 10 sections, and anyone can access this. This is online at NFAC and has been available for a long time. So how do you go about updating a code of practice? First thing that you have to do is you have to assemble your code development committee. So you assemble your code development committee by going to all the major sectors, equine sectors in Canada, and asking them to choose a representative to represent their sector at the table. I myself represent the Canadian Veterinary Medical Association. And as soon as you have assembled that code development committee, so that's going to include, as I mentioned, people from racing, people from rodeo, people from feedlot sector, Humane Canada, SPCAs, the donkey and mule expert. We really try to cover all of the bases in Canada in 15, 16 people, which is a bit challenging. And once we've done that, we conduct what's called a top of mind survey. So we are asked to ask the people that we represent, what are the 4 or 5 top welfare issues? And in this case, we actually did a top of mind survey, and we surveyed Canadian horsemen and asked them what they thought. What are the biggest areas we need to look at? At that point, you assemble your scientific committee. So these are horse welfare and care experts. And they sit down with the code development committee, and together we have a meeting, we determine what are the top welfare issues, meaning problems in the horse industry in Canada. And then at the step 3 is the scientific committee begins drafting its report, and the code development committee begins drafting the code. So what the science committee does is they look at these top welfare issues and they start combing the literature for all of the new technical information or scientific reports that are of relevance in developing the code process. And the code development committee immediately kind of gets to work and starts working on the old code. Eventually, the scientific committee's report is presented to the code development committee and then is peer reviewed. So we have this group of scientists that develop this report, and then they send it to another group of scientists that actually um, do what's called a peer review. And what that means is they're scientists who are able to judge the work of other scientists to make sure that the conclusions are valid. So it's a very heavily vetted, if you don't mind the use of the word, scientific document. And one of the things we're working on in NFAC is we're going to start trying to publish those scientific committee reports in international journals because they're really top quality and they're an opportunity for people that want to see everything that's new in one document. So we want to start leveraging that work. And that also gives those scientists that have given of their time freely to create those reports gives them some acknowledgement with respect to their publishing work. The reality is the bulk of the people that work on codes of practice in Canada are volunteers, which is a pretty amazing ask when you think of it. So step number 5, after we have the science committee report accepted, then we continue drafting the code. Step number 6 is which is where we are right now, and that is the draft code is released for a 60-day public comment period, and the scientific committee's report is published. So you can access the scientific committee report if you'd like to read it. The code of practice went for public comment on the 12th of January, and you are able to comment on it. We'll talk about it more later until the 12th of March, so it's 60 days. And so step 7, which would be after the 12th of March, we're going to consider input from the public, and then the final code will be published. And it will include a report of how feedback from the public comment period informed the final code. And I sometimes hear kind of animal welfare activists say, oh, the public comment period, that's just NFAC, checking a box and, it doesn't mean anything. And, oh, it means a lot. And my favorite example is from the 2013 code. I was gunning, I am the anti-animal mutilation person, and I was gunning to have the process of horse tail docking banned back in 2013, and I could not achieve consensus around the table. There was too much pushback, and so we sort of had to accept defeat. And the public comment was so strong that the draft horse sector came back and said, no, it's time for us to take this big step. So we were one of the, I wouldn't say one of the first, but we were in the middle of the pack of the developed countries behind Europe, banning tail docking of horses in Canada. Yes, it still happens, but technically all those people are very likely breaking provincial law. And what your hope is that this practice is eventually going to just disappear. So who's actually on the code development committee? I already alluded to this. We have veterinarians, producer representatives. So in our case, sport horse, feedlot, donkeys, racing, Cheval, Quebec. They have their own. They have quite a robust animal welfare program in Quebec. So they are very big contributors. Animal welfare advocacy associations. So Humane Canada. Provincial animal protection enforcement authorities, so people that are responsible for cruelty investigations, provincial government representatives, federal government representatives. We have technical experts, so we have one person that's an expert on transportation and transportation and horse slaughter, and also researchers, being that we have the chair of the scientific committee, the chief researcher, who is actually from the University of Prince Edward Island. So in this year, in this update, our priority welfare issues was number 1 was pain recognition. We felt that there's the ability of horsemen and the horse industry in general to recognize pain in horses was severely deficient. And we felt like a lot of horse handling problems are related and as a result of unrecognized pain. So that one made it to the list. Horse castration. Horse castration remains one of the most dangerous regular practices performed by by veterinarians, routine veterinary procedures. It has a very high risk of complications, so we wanted that looked at. Principles in training and learning theory. There's lots of misinformation on the good old internet on how horses learn and should be treated around learning. And then also young horse skeletal development and response to exercise. Lots of really interesting new information there as well. We have a little bit of an epidemic of young injured sport horses, and we wanted to know why. So there you can see there's a link to the full scientific report on the NFAC website. So, so we are in the public comment period now, so it's 60 days, as I mentioned, and this is the opportunity for stakeholders to feedback on our work so far at the code table, and you are more than welcome to participate, and we would love you to participate if you have the time and energy to go through this massive document, which we accept is too long, but we're working on it. There's an old saying, I would have made it shorter, but I ran out of time, and it's exactly what happened with us. It takes a lot of time to develop really good content. To edit really good content takes more time, and we didn't have enough time to try to get the code shorter, and we are going to have to try and get it shorter because it's a pretty big read right now. So, what's changed in the code update? Well, general overview, the length, as I mentioned, and there's a lot of more information in the preambles. There's a lot of new requirements, a lot of new recommended practices, one entirely new section on emergency preparedness. We never had that before, but as you know, we've had a few emergency climatic situations in British Columbia. We were overdue for that. The husbandry section has been divided up, and we have a lot of new appendices. So what are the important changes? As I say, the new emergency preparedness section, major section of overhauls in the training. Formerly feedlot management has been moved to be called loose horse management because loose horses include things like feedlot horses, also include rodeo horses, may include some semi-feral horses on. It's a much bigger topic than just feedlots. And then husbandry practices has been split into husbandry practices and training because it was just too much, it was just too big. And then we've also expanded and refined the health management section. So what's the big picture story here? And the big picture story is overall, there's been an increased acknowledgement of the long life of a horse and its needs and changing needs throughout that lifetime. And also a recognition that horses feel pain and that it's the caregiver's responsibility to alleviate that pain as promptly as possible and avoid causing pain wherever possible. Pretty normal modern thinking, really. There's some other things about changes in attitudes around horses. So, for example, I'm an older Canadian. I grew up Canadian Pony Club with a no foot, no horse maxim, and that actually made it into the 2013 code. Now I find that as kind of almost an arrogant sort of statement. You cannot underestimate the importance of foot care and good farriery and all of that stuff. But no foot, no horse kind of implies that a horse's only value is when it's physically able to serve humans. And I'm in quite a different headspace about that now when I see how horses serve humans in so many different ways. Everything from equine facilitated therapy to potentially unmounted work to just being companions for human beings. Many of the horses in my practice now live beyond 30 years. They outlive the birth of children, children going to college, children moving away from home, the loss of the horses caregiver slash owner's parents, maybe a divorce. A horse can spend a horse that is lucky enough to spend its whole life with a human family may very well outlive a lot of those family members, and to somehow imply that if he's not sound, he's not worthy, that doesn't sit very well with me anymore. The other one that is this concept of making the right thing easy and the wrong thing hard. It implies that it's okay to make things hard, i.e. physically punish or overwork when a horse doesn't understand what's asked of it. So, when I see somebody in a clinic setting and the horse is terrified because it goes by the mirror, and so it spooks. It's never seen a mirror before. It's a prey animal. It's afraid. And, there's some horse not wanting to get in a horse trailer. And so, the clinician says, spin that horse, get control of his feet or whatever. They provide some sort of a reason for this. So this horse is whipping around, and I'm thinking, this is a scared animal. Like, is that okay? Like, is it okay to take an animal that's frightened and just whip it around in tiny circles because somehow we want control of it? Like, does the animal have no autonomy? Can we not respect the horse for what it is? Because it's a prey animal first. And so these kinds of things, I'm really struggling with these old, then they're not even that old maxims. They're maybe 20 years old now. Nah, I think they're getting out of date. Out of date. A horse to understand may very well have a human trainer cause. So if your horse doesn't understand what you're asking of it, you might want to reflect on how you're asking and how you've made it easy for him. So, new requirements. Well, people that say our codes don't go far enough, in fact, we added 70 new requirements, and that's pretty amazing. So I'm going to go through them, and I'm just having a little eyeball here. We're doing pretty well for time. I'm not necessarily going to read all of them because there's a lot of them. But so what I've done is I've summarized them for you, and we're going to try to definitely hit the highlights. So in facility and housing, here's a B South Coast one. During periods of high precipitation, there must be an ongoing mud management plan implemented. So if your horses are standing up to their knees in hocks in mud, and the SPCA gets called because somebody drove by, saw this, and says, "Hey, this is not good enough." You have to have a plan in place. We can't ask people to not have any mud on their property on any given day. I mean, you just think about how many atmospheric rivers have we had on the South Coast this year. But you have to have a plan in place, and the plan might be right now we can't do anything because we can't access those pans, but as soon as they dry a little bit, we get a backhoe in and we add gravel. We can't get the horses out of the mud right now, but because we just had a flood, they're getting into the barn every night in clean, dry stalls for 16 hours, and we hose their legs off or take care of them. That's okay. But you need to have a plan in place. You can't have animals standing endlessly in muddy fields or paddocks. Newly formed groups must be monitored daily at minimum and interventions made as necessary. So there's a real focus to trying to get horses into groups more. And you'll all have heard about this, I'm sure, how horses want to be in a herd, and everybody wants to have their horse in a herd now, if they're okay with the risks associated with that. But you can't just take a whole bunch of unsocialized horses, just throw them together and go camping for a week. Horses can be pretty rough on each other. Horses can injure each other, and occasionally groups of horses are simply incompatible. So when you adopt these group situations, you have to be prepared to monitor and intervene if necessary. Fencing thing about stallion, that's kind of motherhood. Another important one, South Coast, comes to mind. Stalls must have a depth of bedding sufficient to absorb urine, prevent sores, and encourage horses to lie down, and bedding must be non-toxic. So putting horses on hard rubber mats is not acceptable, and probably most anybody that's on this call would probably know that, but it needs to be written down somewhere. Some really cool, we added some cool stuff about these new soft stall systems, which are excellent. But important welfare thing, because horses need to be able to lie down to rest. And another one that was never in the old code, and that is that leaf blowers must not be used while horses are in enclosed facilities. So a lot of people for labor saving will use a leaf blower to to clean out the aisleways. That is absolutely diabolical for horses that have asthma. And many of our horses have asthma in our a very moldy climate in British Columbia on the wet coast. So blowing all that hay dust around is diabolical. So we've added a requirement there. You can use a leaf blower. You just need to have the horse. You need to put the horses outside. So back to facilities and housing, we've refined some of those requirements. So in muddy conditions, horses must have access to a well-drained area on which they can stand, lie down, and that offers relief from mud in the yard and pasture yard. Excuse me. Dry hotel. And that's that modification of that old mud requirement. And horses must also have access to shelter, either constructed or natural, that protects them from the harmful effects of extreme weather conditions. And the shelter must be large enough to accommodate all the horses in a given area at the same time. So the example that I would think of is that muddy, disgusting field, and somebody has one of those little tarp shelters in the corner, and there's 15 horses in that field. And when the SPCA comes by and goes, not good enough, they go, oh, well, we got a shelter. No, not good enough. And also, if blankets are used, the condition of the horses beneath the blanket must be examined at least weekly and frequently enough to recognize changes in body condition and keep the horse free of ill effects. So we're talking a leaking blanket, and they're getting rain scald underneath it, pressure sores from blankets, horses that are experiencing very sudden weight loss or gain. They need to have those blankets off often enough that you can recognize it. And kind of a motherhood statement on fencing. Electric fences must be installed according to manufacturer's specifications, be grounded properly, and be energized. It's a little bit of a no-brainer, but a non-working electric fence is just a hazard. And so if you're going to have electric fences, you have to have some kind of a schedule to ensure that they're working. And if 6 pens and stalls are used, they must be equipped with a source of feed and water and be cleaned and disinfected before use by a new horse. Sounds kind of obvious, but not necessarily. Still in facilities designed and maintained to minimize risk. That seems obvious. Horses kept indoors without natural light. Artificial lighting must be provided at a minimum for a period of 6 hours per day. And keeping horses in continuous light or dark is not acceptable. Horses, there's a lot of problems associated with too much light for horses. It affects their coat development, their diurnal rhythm, cycling of mares, and it can really disrupt their sleep. And sleep deprivation is a significant welfare concern for horses. And we have to have a lighting requirement too, because I want you to think about, the absolute neglect situation of some horse sitting in a horrible dark barn somewhere, and never seeing the light of day. Also completely unacceptable. Ammonia concentration, not more than 15 parts per million. 15 parts per million is eye-watering. So I'm really hoping that nobody that's on this call would ever have ammonia levels like that. And we've changed all the requirements from adequate for maintaining health and vigor, which is sort of old language, to adequate for maintaining a state of good health and development, just more modern language. Emergency preparedness. This is quite a large section, and has the development of which has had to be developed because of floods, wildfires, smoke events, etc. And it's quite wordy, so I don't think we need to read through that, but there's a lot of language here about having an emergency plan in place, having things like that fire extinguishers, and having procedures kind of codified, so your boarders, your caretakers, they know what to do. And also a map of the facilities readily acceptable for emergency crews. If you go on a backyard place with 2 stalls and 2 paddocks, you really don't need a map. An emergency crew that came, it's obvious what's there. But if you have a bigger barn and there should be a map available of paddocks, fields, secure areas, because what happens if you have to evacuate and people have to go in and have to move horses out of your barn, for example? And they must include specific actions and those designated to conduct specific actions. So people that you would put in charge if you aren't there, they should be easily accessible, and the plans have to ensure that the welfare of the horses is safeguarded in any potential emergency event. It's not a perfect world, but we do our best. Electrical equipment must be hardwired, and extension cords must only be used temporarily and unplugged, not in use. There is nothing more tragic and awful than a barn fire, and all electrical wiring and outlets must be out of reach of horses. We all have that annoying gelding Dennis the Menace type that is determined to burn the barn down and kill himself and all his friends. And importance of fire extinguishers. Back to all of the horrendous weather events that we've had, alternative methods or power source must be available to run critical systems. So you need to have something that will run your watering system, your ventilation, your feeding system if necessary. And you need to have enough food and water or availability of water to last you for 72 hours, back to all the climatic stuff we're having. We can't change these major weather events. Those are beyond our control, but being prepared for them, that is in our control, and that is now required. And everything should be inspected regularly and kept in good working order. And one thing that comes to mind is fans. One of the most common causes of barn fires is dirty fans in barns, and particularly domestic fans. So fans that are designed for household use should never be used in a barn because they clog up with dust and then they light on fire. And you should have a written evacuation and or shelter in place plan. And even so, we sort of think of the wildfire thing, like what happens if there's a wildfire in your area and you're away from home for 6 or 7 hours? It should say somewhere that your horses, if somebody comes to get them, they should take them, for example, to the fairgrounds. That's been designated as a evacuation area, or maybe somebody at a lakefront property or whatever. But those plans should be in place in case you're not there. Section number 4, feed and water. Here is our big giant win, and that is that snow is not an acceptable sole source of water for horses. It was mind-boggling to me that it took a second code to make that happen, but horses cannot sustain themselves on snow alone systems unless they're very carefully managed and the conditions are absolutely perfect. When absolutely perfect conditions, let's say outside of Calgary, can change overnight with a Chinook. So it's now been understood that horses have to have access to water winter and summer. Seems kind of basic, but it's a thing. Feeding practices must allow for natural feeding posture and must not negatively impact health. So, for example, let's say you're still trying to feed your horse on a high hay rack. That is super bad for his airways, super bad for his neck. So we have to be trying to mimic natural feeding as much as possible. Horses that do not have access to a pasture or continuous hay supply must be fed at minimum twice a day. Also seems like a motherhood statement, but it wasn't in the old code. And weaned foals must have access to a suitable diet before, during, and after weaning. So you can't take a foal, or early wean it, rip it off its mother, and not have a good feeding plan established and in place. And feed and water refinement on the whole hay quality issue. That horses must have daily access to forage that's free from any offensive odors, visible mold, and has minimal dust. Once again, guessing that everybody on this call probably ensures that already, but it has to be written down somewhere. Under health management, this is a big one. And that is anybody that is in an area where they're able, they need to establish a working relationship with a practicing veterinarian, also known as a VCPR, veterinary client-patient relationship. And if it's not possible due to an animal location, so let's say you have animals that are completely outside of the veterinary service area, or there are simply no vets in your area, you have to establish a health management plan, including a euthanasia plan. So the excuse can't be, well, there's no vets up here, so I don't need to provide any health management. And if you're in an area where veterinarians are available, essentially what this VCPR says is you have to have a family doctor. And it's going to be interesting to see if we're going to get some pushback on that. But if you really think about it, being responsible for horses, not unlike being responsible for any other sentient being. And you need to be able to have somebody that can help you, if only for euthanasia, when that animal runs into an inevitable time in its life where it's either sick or dying or needs to die. You should comply with vaccination requirements to attend or participate in shows or events, and your vet can help you with that. Rabies vaccine is something we don't do a lot of in British Columbia. We should probably be doing more of, considering that we do have rabid bats. Anybody that's responsible for a horse must be able to recognize the common causes, behavioral indicators of pain. So if you've got a horse that's dragging a broken leg and the SPCA drives in and you say, oh, I didn't know there was anything wrong with them, that doesn't cut it. And horses that are in pain must receive appropriate management changes or treatment without delay. So you cannot have a horse limping around your pasture endlessly without doing something about it. Horses must be sound and healthy to work or compete, seems reasonable. Horses that become sick or lame during work must be removed and appropriate care provided. You have to abide by your sport regulations regarding pain, and you should not use things that mask pain just so that you can carry on with your sport. And equipment must also not be used to mask pain behaviors that are the result of pain. So, for example, putting a martingale on a tight standing martingale on a horse so he can't nod his head because he's lame in front is not cool and not acceptable. So in the refinement of old practices under health management, so suspect cases of reportable diseases must be reported. Horses showing signs consistent with dental problems must be examined and treated without delay. And horses with laminitis must receive appropriate management and treatment, which may be lifelong, include medications, dietary management, and hoof care. Severe cases that do not respond may require euthanasia. So we sometimes run into people that will literally have a horse with laminitis lying around in their yard for 3 years because they find it too heartbreaking, and they either A, can't or won't adopt appropriate management procedures, or the horse is simply too far gone and they are not feeling strong enough emotionally to say goodbye to this horse. That's not acceptable. We know now that laminitis is one of the most painful conditions that a horse has to endure. And we need to be able to step in if people are unable to make good decisions. Under loose horse management, which was formerly feedlot management, important thing here is anybody that is managing loose or feedlot horses, they must have proper equipment to effectively and humanely handle horses that have not been halter trained. So that does not mean going out there lassoing them, choking them down. That means proper chutes, stocks, squeezes. If you're going to have handle loose horses that are not halter trained, you absolutely must have some handling facilities. And they have to be designed properly and used in a manner that will not cause injury and stress. Because if you imagine, our area, an example, people rescued horses that came out of a feedlot to slaughter situation that were pregnant and then developed problems foaling. And you arrive with a full half out of a horse and it's running around in a field. And what do you expect a veterinarian to do? How can you possibly help that animal? And stallions must be segregated from mares at feedlots, intermediary sites, and rescues. Intermediary site would be something like an auction. You have to segregate stallions from other horses to prevent aggression and unwanted pregnancy. Make sure new arrivals understand where feed is, and they may only be you may have to observe them for a while, make sure that they can drink out of a water bowl. You may have to provide buckets or feed tubs for them to drink out of if they're not familiar or are scared of a water bowl. And new arrivals need to be looked at least twice a day, make sure they're healthy and eating and drinking. And here's a really important one for me personally, and that is if a mare arrives at a feedlot or an auction mart, and she appears to be visibly pregnant, she needs to be examined by a veterinarian immediately, and plans must be made to segregate her for foaling and or rehoming. So, if a pregnant mare shows up, like let's say a slaughterhouse feedlot, for heaven's sakes, we need to intervene on those cases right away to make sure that that mare does not foal out suddenly in a group of horses. And typically a rehoming situation there's always such kind-hearted people. Usually those animals can be rehomed quite easily. Individuals, this is another really important one. Individuals or organizations, rescues or sanctuaries that take custody of malnourished or emaciated horses. So those ones that are skeletons, BC body condition score of less than 3 or less than 2 for donkeys, must consult with a veterinarian before beginning a feeding program to prevent refeeding syndrome, which is a life-threatening condition. There's a lot of people that sort of decide that they're going to start rescuing super skinny horses and end up killing them by not refeeding them properly. So we've made that a requirement. If you're going to take on super skinny horses, you need veterinary advice. You need to ensure that groups of horses have sufficient feed space, and segregation pens with appropriate fencing and bedding must be available for expectant mares and mares with foals. And all foals arriving or born at the facility must be segregated with their dam and receive necessary care and attention. So we hope to actually catch them before they foal, but we all know of that mare that arrived showing up kind of fat, and she had a foal in the morning. Also in loose horse management, a dry lying or standing area must be available in every pen. So because these animals do not typically come into a barn, they're in a pen. So if the pen is wet and muddy, there has to be a dry lying area. I'm sorry I didn't have a picture of a muddy pen, but I just found a nice picture of a horse in a grassy field with a mountain behind it. Husbandry section. This is about stereotypic behavior, formerly called vices. If a horse begins to show stereotypic behavior, like weaving, cribbing, stall walking, that kind of thing, the owner or caregiver must take steps to identify and address the underlying cause of the problem. Lots of horses arrive with these behaviors, and once these behaviors are established, they're very difficult to make go away. So we can't hold you responsible if you're providing that horse a good life, but if your horse suddenly starts cribbing, you need to try to figure out why. So for example, one cause of cribbing has been determined to be selenium deficiency. Like, why would you ever let a nutritional deficiency, kind of semi-wreck a good horse? So those things should be explored. Horses confined to tie stalls must be tied in a way that allows them to lie down in a normal sleeping posture. Tie stalls are not that common in Canada, but they are still common in some of the bigger, older facilities, and the horses actually do quite well in them. Also still used in the PMU industry, but they need to be roomy and comfortable enough that the horses will comfortably lie down. And you're in a good tie stall barn when you walk in the afternoon and 3/4 of the horses are lying down and sleeping. Won't find that in a box stall barn, interestingly enough. Another thing about tie stall barns is they usually have way better air quality because they're easier to keep clean. So as abhorrent as some people find tie stalls, that apparently they still have a place in Canada in some places. And effective for horses after January 2029, pain control must be provided unless prohibited by regulatory requirements. So there are some horses that are heading for the meat industry that cannot have pain control at the time of branding. But in general, branding should be discouraged. Branding is painful, is rather outmoded. We have much better identification methods. But in some situations, so community pastures or for export, for animals that are going for human consumption, some branding is still required. Doesn't thrill us. I think by the time the next code comes around, everything will be electronic, is my guess. Another husbandry refinement of a requirement: a restraint of horses must never cause avoidable pain or injury. So we want to be as careful as possible to never hurt a horse when restraining it. And electric prods must only be used to assist the movement of horses when animal or human safety is at risk or as an absolute last resort. So a horse, for example, that's in a chute system goes kind of AWOL, turns around and starts running over horses in the other direction. Another example is a horse that arrives, for example, at a surgical facility with a really severe colic, can't get it up in the trailer, have to try to get it up as a last-ditch effort to get it into an induction room. But they can only be used by people that are trained in their use and should be an absolute last resort. Under Section 8, exercise and training, here is a new requirement, and that is that whips, spurs, and bits must only be used to give light cues and not be used to inflict pain through excessive force and frequency for discipline and encouragement. So in other words, you're allowed to use a whip or a spur for encouragement, but to flog a horse or spur a horse excessively, to grab a hold of its face and to whip it around in circles with a bit, and all bits causes some degree of discomfort in the mouth, is not acceptable. I will challenge people to think about that in the barrel racing sector, where I personally find the excessive use of spurs quite abhorrent. Horses running as fast as they can, and they're still getting spurred every stride. So those of you that are barrel racers, I think you want to have a close look at that. And those of you that are not barrel racers should be looking at and wondering what the value is about spurring a horse, particularly a horse with a roweled spur every stride. Horse is running as fast as it can. So, and we've already determined in terms of whipping horses, they've kind of banned, whips have been banned in horse raising in lots of countries in the world because they don't make horses run faster. So why would we hit our animals to make them run faster when it does no good and causes pain and challenges social license? So horses must be trained in a manner under exercise and training refinement. We want them to be trained in a manner that has positive outcomes and does not subject them to pain or fear as a result of the training method used. They must never be subjected to training methods which are abusive or intentionally injure the horse. And the analogy that I use is I'd like you to think about a world where a kid in grade 2 that can't read, so we'll just beat them up for a while. That used to be the thing 100 years ago. But if a horse can't do something, why would we inflict pain on it? Either it can't do something because it doesn't understand what's being asked, it's physically incapable of doing that, or it's in pain, so it's not capable of learning. Reproductive management. This kind of alludes to natural breeding methods. We need to pair animals that are obviously size match. Mares that are in the last 10% of the mares and genets. Got to give Jennies their due. In the last 10% of their gestation period should not be moved unless they're on the advice of a veterinarian. So the exception to this would be when they, for example, go to a vet clinic because of a high risk foaling or go to a foaling center. And they must be moved prior to active labor. Different if your horse has got what's dystocia, so she's in active labor and she has to go to a hospital. That's different, of course. And another requirement is that weaned foals can't be kept alone. They have to be kept in the company of other equines, such as weaned foals or older calm horses. And another new requirement, and that is that mares and genets close to foaling must be observed at least twice a day for health, well-being, and signs of foaling. And the frequency of monitoring should increase as foaling becomes imminent. Most of the people that I know that foal out horses are much more vigilant than that, but somewhere we have to have a baseline minimum, and the baseline minimum is now at least twice a day. Under transportation, a lot of the transportation stuff actually comes from the federal transportation regulations, which you can access. A lot of people don't understand that as even a kind of a backyard horse person, as a horse transporter, all of the transport regulations do apply to you. So you have to have a really close look at the compromised animal thing. So like really lame, really sick horses can't be moved, and really lame and sick horses should never show up at an auction because it's illegal federally to transport them. The absolute maximum transportation time in Canada is 28 hours. It's about double what it should be, in my opinion, but 28 hours is an improvement from the old 36. And compromised horses, so horses that do have some special needs, 12 hours is the maximum for them. And then conveyances that are used to transport horses must be suitable and have absorbent bedding. This seems like it should probably be obvious, but as I say, you have to write it down somewhere because there's a horse traveling in the back of the pickup truck with inadequate rails. So we have to give the regulatory people something to work with. Horses have to be able to maintain their preferred position. So your trailer head needs to be high enough. You cannot transport horses in pot-bellied trailers. Horses have to be protected from temperature extremes. Anyone that's like a commercial transporter has to have contingency plans in place as that they can implement if needed. And you need to make sure all your paperwork is completed and provided to the transporter so that your animals don't get hung up somewhere like at a border where they could exceed their transportation times. There may not be adequate food and water, etc. So you have to make sure your paperwork is in place so your animals can proceed unfettered by regulatory rules that could put them in a welfare compromised situation. And particularly if your horses are going to the US, of course, all of your normal export documents have to be ready, your Coggins test. But when you're transporting the US, you got to be really careful to check all the states that your horses are going through, because sometimes there's different regulations state to state, and there may be extra certification required. People loading and unloading, transporting horses must have the necessary knowledge and skills to conduct those activities in compliance with, once again, the health of animals regulations. You must not beat, strike, whip, or kick a horse to get it into a trailer. We might want to see the back of some of those horse shows when horses don't want to go home. You can't use a prod for it. You can't use a whip or driving device that might cause injury, suffering, or death. You can't drag an animal into a trailer, and you can't handle an animal in any way that's likely to cause that animal injury, suffering, or death. So beating a horse into a trailer is not acceptable. Horses must be loaded calmly, quietly, and patiently, and inhumane handling or transport must be documented and immediately reported to the proper authorities. So in our case, it would be the SPCA and the CFIA. Ramps must be properly designed and not have excessive slope. Everyone involved with horses, transporting horses, must understand appropriate stocking density. So this means you can't put too many loose horses in a truck. And it's the right of any transporter to refuse to load horses that they deem to be compromised or unfit for transport. So your trucker is responsible. So if you ask him to pick up a horse to take to auction that's dead lame, and he says, I'm not loading it, you have to respect that decision because he's ultimately responsible. Horses must be provided with food, forage, and rest upon arrival at the farm or rest station, and they must be assessed individually at the time of unloading. And once again, I'm guessing anybody that's on this call probably does a wonderful job of transporting their horses. Typically, we end up regulations are written. People that need to read the regulations the most are usually not at the meetings. That's how it goes. And once again, horses that are unfit for transport must not be sold or sent to a processing facility, auction, or assembly center in lieu of euthanasia. And we have to get really, really strict about this. There's lots of stuff, lots of programs, lots of stuff on the internet about people rescuing horses from the slaughter pens and rescuing them from the auction barn. And the slaughter buyer is the bad guy, and the guy that owns the feedlot is the bad guy, and the guy that runs the slaughterhouse is the bad guy because there's these skinny, neglected horses there. And this is just like mind blowing for me at this stage. These are the people that are actually providing it out for these animals. They're actually feeding these animals. They're getting their feet done. They're actually taking care of these neglected animals that have showed up. And as an industry, we need to stop the shaming of the people that end up with these animals that have been neglected by people that are in our equine community, okay, that have caused the animals to be in this state. And we need to redirect the blame game. And we need to start intervening as an industry much earlier, okay, and making sure the animals within our industry get proper care versus getting dumped at the auction mart. And another refinement of the euthanasia requirement, and that is equines that are not responding to treatment or have an untreatable condition that compromises their welfare must be euthanized. Some of us are really not very good at saying enough is enough, and horses can linger on for weeks or months with untreatable, incurable conditions, and they're just miserable. And they have people that just love them too much to do what needs to be done to take those horses out of daily suffering. And I think if there's one thing I've learned as a veterinarian of 35 years since the advent of MAID, to me, it's been an interesting experience watching just how quickly human beings exit planet Earth if they're in constant, unrelenting pain with no prospect of recovery. People tend to leave in a big hurry. So, in conclusion, this is just a little quote from David Fraser, one of my favorite animal welfare researcher experts, innovators in Canada and in the world. And essentially, David will talk to you about how you can write all the regulations in the world about the care of any species of animal. But there's a lot more there about attitude than about what's written down. And David can be quoted to saying that we need to focus on the human dimension of animal welfare. Current animal welfare standards tend to emphasize the environments where animals are kept, but actually welfare outcomes remain highly variable, i.e., it depends on the people. We need now more emphasis on how animal welfare is influenced by human factors such as skill, attitudes, attentiveness, empathy, consistency, and perhaps the personality of animal caretakers. And I hope that you can take away from your time of hopefully reviewing the code, evaluating your own attitudes, how they've changed, what you've learned in your horse journey, or if you're just new to horses, reflect on the stuff we used to do to horses so that we can all do a better job as individual horsemen and as an industry, and to protect our social license. Because if we don't start doing a better job of taking care of our horses, society might just take them away from us. And we need only look at the racing industry in British Columbia. Society took the right of British Columbians to race horses in this province away from them this year. So at this point, I'm quite happy to take questions or feedback. This is one of my own lovely horses, Manitoba bred, warm blood cross, and my crazy COVID purchase, a 17 three-hand warm blood that I bought in the Fraser Valley from a wonderful breeder. And I continue to be active in the horse world, and I got a cast to prove it. So
Oh,
Sarah,
cute.
how do you want to handle questions? Or maybe
Yeah.
everybody left. I don't know.
No, no, we still got people on. So and there are a couple questions already in the Q&A box. So yeah, thank you so much for that presentation. And yeah, it's a cute picture of your horse there. All right. So our first question is from Joan, and she's asking, does pain include cognitive pain, such as fear or fight, freeze behavior?
Oh, what a fantastic question.
Mhm.
Um, I'm really gonna have to think on that one when we go through the public comment period. And you need to please comment. There's so much information that's coming down. Please participate in the public comment period. We are really, really concerned about the psychological health of horses. And I think we really need to look at the pain with the mental pain side in mind. In my mind, I've been thinking a lot more about the physical because I'm a veterinarian versus an animal welfare expert or a behaviorist. But that is a great question.
Yeah, perfect. All right. Sharon is asking, ideal to have more than one horse, but sometimes that isn't feasible. Where is that landing now?
Well, there are some European countries, and you're probably asking that because you know a thing or two. And there's some places in the world you're no longer able to keep a single horse. And I really struggle with that because a lot of my clients, frankly, are in their 60s, 70s, and even 80s. And their herds dwindle down from 10 to 2 to 3 to 2. And that last one, and what do we do? And they say, Doc, I can't get another horse that's going to outlive me. And when I'm euthanizing number two and number one is left, and I think that's where we really have to put it to caretakers. And your horse, like if you're asking the question, you're obviously awesome, right? If your horse is really struggling, okay, let's try to find a solution here. Maybe we can take a compatible horse short term. So when your last horse goes, that one can return to his home farm. Maybe we can find a retirement facility close to where you live so we can move that horse for the very last time. It's a very nuanced situation, and I am extremely reluctant to do the hard rule thing because I think, individual horses that are going to do okay on their own might end up being euthanized prematurely. Sometimes we euthanize the blind horse, and the horse that's left, they say, he's 5 years old again. He's obviously so relieved. He was sick and tired of being in charge. You can't guess how the last horse is going to be until that second to last horse is gone. So I got to put that in the hands of the caregiver because nobody knows that horse better and nobody understands the situation as well as that caregiver. Great question.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. Um, okay, this one's just is this video of the presentation available?
Will be.
Yes, so we are recording this and we will post it on our YouTube channel after. We don't have any other ones at the moment, but I'll still give people some time to, if they're writing out their questions and whatnot. I guess I had a question as well, Dr. Bobson, for turnout and everything. Is turnout or, instead of just a box stall, is that going to be a requirement for?
That's a great question, Sarah, and it's our biggest challenge right now in terms of
Mhm.
trying to find consensus.
Yeah.
There's some very strong positions at the table that they're absolutely clear that turnout and exercise are not the same thing, and I agree. Um, and wanting horses to have turnout every day and ideally in groups, and that's a really tough ask
Mhm.
because of situations like racing. Also, some places on the
Mhm.
South Coast, there simply isn't there isn't
Yeah.
enough turnout on the property. And then we run into that whole horse value thing. And you know, lots of lower middle level performance horses like show horses are now 50 to $100,000, and people are adamant that they don't want those horses to exercise freely because they're terrified
Mhm.
that they're going to get injured. So if you have adequately identified the one place that we're still really stuck
Okay.
trying
Yeah.
to come up with something that we can all live with, it's
Yeah.
consensus in action. But thank you for
Oh,
asking.
yeah, of course. Okay, we had another one come through. Um, so Joan's asking, what are your thoughts about some type of certification for professional horse trainers? Did it come up during the discussion?
Yeah, it was a huge thing back in 2013, and it's still a big problem for us. Unfortunately, we don't have in Canada yet a certification system, but it's something we should be working towards so that people can be qualified. For now, we have to encourage people to, you've got to go and observe, look for problems, educate yourself what are correct training methods, and before you consign a horse to a trainer, make sure that you do your due diligence in observation. If you see something, say something. If one thing we have to get way better at is if we're in a riding lesson or we're in a clinic or where our horse is in a training session and we think things are getting out of control, we need to be way better in saying, that's enough. And I'm going to take my horse home and I'm going to regroup. I want to think on this because this doesn't feel right to me. If it doesn't feel right to me, you're not in the right place.
Mhm.
Great question. We need something
Yeah,
in Canada.
yeah, perfect. All right. Um, okay. Amelia is asking, I teach an equine welfare course at UBC. I would like my class to engage with the comment process. Would it be best to send in our comments in a single document?
It's up to you. I mean, it's up to you. I think probably it's best if you do for a couple of reasons. One, we run the risk of being drowned in comments, like the dairy code. I can't remember how many thousands they got, but that was challenging. I think when a committee is looking at individual comments, if you're just Joan or Helen or whatever, but if you're a scholarly group that are studying welfare, I think your comments have more weight, and the people in your group might just be members of that next code committee. So having them work on the whole idea of collaborative opinions, the whole consensus conversation, that's a really, really good legwork. So I'd love to see your comments as a group from your course. That would be exciting.
Yeah, perfect. All right. Um, we have Joan asking one more question. Does the survey include the proposed changes to the code? I can't find the proposed draft online.
So if you go to NFAC, you will find the entire proposed code is there. So
Oh,
you just have to go to NFAC's website and then click on equine code, and there's this big red box and it invites you in. It's very user friendly.
oh, perfect. Okay, yeah, and I'm sure once we like tomorrow or the following day when we send out the webinar recording, we can include like the link to that as
That would
well.
be great.
I'm
That
sure.
would be it. And
Yeah.
you still have lots of time. Yes, it's
Yeah.
a document, but the 12th of March is a ways away.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. All right. Oh, somebody's asking, is the link to the draft code, is it within the survey? Does that make sense?
No, the top of mind survey that was earlier. So if you go
Okay.
to the NPAC website, it will invite you into the draft code.
Okay. Okay. Um, and for somebody's asking for horse companions, do sheep and goats, would those count as horse companions?
I think it's up to you and your horse.
Right. Um, Perfect. Oh, perfect. And Melissa's just put a link there in the questions. And then, yeah, we have a lot of people just commenting, saying thank you for the presentation. Very much appreciated. Awesome.
All
Okay.
right.
Well, that's
Well,
great. Yeah.
thank you, everybody, for your time and your interest. This is our code. It belongs to our industry. So take the time to comment. And even if you read it through and go, yeah, a couple things I would have changed, but it's great, that's okay too. But we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Bobson, for coming on and presenting. And yeah, we will definitely get this information out to everybody.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks so
Yeah.
much.
Thanks. Take care.
Yeah, have a good evening.
You too. Bye.
Bye bye now.